Hello and welcome to the Dinosaw for week 7. Another 7 curious, interesting things I saw last week. So let's crack on. First one is Bitpay. Bitpay are a cryptocurrency debit card provider. So imagine a plastic card or at least an account. And when you pay for your goods, then you instead of just using normal cash, you can actually just pay using cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. So you imagine going in with your card and just tapping on the machine, and it comes out of your Bitcoin account. So Bitpay have been the first company that Apple have allowed to add their debit card to your iPhone. So therefore you can now put it under your Apple Pay wallet, which basically means everywhere you see Apple Pay, you can now potentially pay directly with Bitcoin. So that's a big step, especially when you've got something like Apple essentially giving it the nod. So you've got other companies like Tesla a couple of weeks ago who said you can now buy your Teslas with Bitcoin, etc. So the big companies and the mainstream are now starting to accept Bitcoin. And also the main part about this one was how do you spend your Bitcoin if you've got it? That was always the tricky thing. And now it's as simple as you tapping your device. So one of the biggest drawbacks of Bitcoin has really been overcome. So yeah. Check out the Bitpay card. Reddit, so last week was the Super Bowl, last Sunday, and yeah, Reddit pretty much stole the ads for a really quirky ad that they ran. So it cost $5.5 million to run a 30-second ad in the Super Bowl. You might think that's quite a rarefied atmosphere, but actually it turns out there is 5 times more advertising time than there is actually sports being played during that airtime. So there's more than enough airtime, shall we say. Reddit had just come off, just come out of the spotlight really because of all of the Wall Street trading shorts stuff with GameStop from a couple of weeks ago, and they never expected to do a Super Bowl ad. And then a week before they thought, you know what, let's go for it. How do we do this? So their agency RGA, massive kudos to them for pulling this off, said, well, what about a 5-second ad? And put this static 5-second ad, which is just a JPEG, I assume, PNG, JPEG, whatever, static image. So they just put a static image in. It intrigued everybody, and just because it was different, everybody else was doing 30-second ads that were all very clever with lots of big stars in them, but putting a 5-second static image in there just got people thinking, talking, searching, going onto social media. And every year there's always a kind of a wash up with all the critics saying, you know, which ad was the best Super Bowl ad, and a lot of them this year said it was Reddit, just with 5 seconds. So yeah, brilliant. So how to stand out amongst the crowds is, you know, when they zig, you zag, etc., etc. There you go, Reddit. Well done on your 5-second advert. 35 really big tech companies, I mean really big, Netflix, Apple, Uber, Tesla, Microsoft, they actually got caught out by a very, very simple hack. Now the only reason I'm even going to attempt to try and explain what this is because it was so simple, it was almost embarrassing. This was actually done by a researcher or a couple of researchers, and they actually got $130,000 for bounty for finding this out because it was a pretty big loophole. Now the way this works is it's part of the open source ecosystem. If you have a piece of code that is done by somebody else, it's open sourced. What you do is your code essentially has a manifest. And that manifest says, right, here's all the bits of code that we need to run. Some of it we've got, some of it is out there on the internet, and just go and get it, essentially. So sometimes there's what's called dependency confusion. So your manifest might say, go and get that thing, but that thing might not exist in that location. So it goes, all right, hang on a minute, I'll see if I've got one internally, and it does something else. However, if it is there, it goes and grabs it. So what this hack did is it found lots of companies that had their manifests that were pointing at bits of code that just weren't there. So all the hackers did, or all the researchers did, is they put some code in its place, called it the same thing it was waiting for. When the big company ran their code, essentially went, oh yeah, great, the code's there now, and then pulled it inside their firewall and ran it. And it was as simple as that. So the attacker didn't really need to do anything. They just put the code there and waited for the victim essentially to pull it inside and execute it. So a really, really obvious thing. How many more of these are out there? We don't really know. This one had never been found before, yet it's so obvious when you know about it. So yeah, 35 big companies got caught doing, got hacked or proved that they would be vulnerable to this. It's now solved, so that's all good. But I just thought it was really intriguingly simple, yeah. I don't know when you'll use this, but I just thought it was interesting. Unreal, so Unreal, these are the 3D engine people. So they have created Metahuman. So this is a human making 3D piece of software, sort of essentially Photoshop, but for 3D humans. So they've put a sneak peek out there of their Metahuman Creator, which is what you're seeing in front of you now. So you can just keep tweaking the human. You can change the eyes, you can choose the gender, you can do whatever you really want to do. Make it older, younger, hair, no hair. You know, sky's the limit basically. So and as soon as you've made it, it saves it in a way that you can just apply it to your motion capture data, or if you've got a game, for instance, then you just basically import the model and it just, you know, maps on top of your models, for instance. So yeah, this is amazing, and it's programmatic as well, so you can start generating these things. But yeah, just to play with these, this might be where you make your avatar of the future. Yeah, I just thought it was absolutely fascinating. It's only a sneak peek at the moment. I don't think you can get it yet, but check out the Unreal Engine and Digital Humans, and have a look at the videos. Basically, they're really intriguing. Yeah, where do we go with this one? So you can now sell your tweets. So this is using NFTs or non-fungible tokens. So this is getting more and more popular. There's a downside to it, which is I'll explain a little later. But what this does is it's a way of proving that something is unique or has worth. So what they're doing here is, this is a company called Cent and their valuables website, and it allows you to bid and to put up for auction your tweets. Now, as soon as somebody buys one of your tweets, they own it. You guarantee, you go into a bit of a transaction, you guarantee that they now technically own it. It's recorded on a blockchain using a token, an NFT. So that's what it does. The most expensive one so far is nearly $2,000 for a 2017 tweet about pasta. You know, obviously, don't get it, but there you go. So the downside of this is these NFTs are on a blockchain, and these blockchains need proof of work to show that something has actually happened, and that takes processor power, and that takes more processor power than you probably imagine. I think in the previous Dinosaw there was another link in there that showed you exactly how much, and it can be up to, you know, a person's energy footprint for an entire year just to make the transaction to own one of these tweets. So it's not without its consequences, shall we say. People are kind of ignoring it at the moment, but I think we'll get to a little bit of a head at some point where we realise this is just not the way to go. However, if you've got some cracking tweets that you really want to put up for sale, then you know what to do. Follow the link. This is Scribe.ai, and they've been around for a while. But they do have, I thought, two really interesting things. Their mission is really to essentially store you. They want to somehow transcribe everything that you know, say, think, do into some sort of database that therefore can be essentially created, create a virtual you of the future. So that's their big mission, which I thought was laudable and interesting. However, the baby steps. So the first step is actually with Zoom. So they've got a new system where you can invite this I guess virtual person to your Zoom call, and what it'll do is it'll listen, it'll take notes, it'll figure out all the important stuff, it'll share where the highlights are, and it does some really interesting things. So that's number one, is it can kind of take notes for you so that you don't have to remember to figure out where the important stuff was. It can actually try and figure that out for you. One of the feature I thought was really interesting, and I've been trying to find something that does this for a while for various reasons, and what it does is, because it knows who's speaking, it can actually then say who spoke the most. Now, what I'd love this to do is to figure out who spoke the most, but who spoke the least, who spoke after somebody, who was quiet when somebody else always spoke, and those sorts of sort of dynamics I think are really interesting. When I coach sessions, for instance, it's very interesting to know how to flatten the room, how to bring people in and out. So this was a feature I just thought, oh, that's really interesting. So yeah, Scribe.ai on their mission to try and create a virtual you of the future. starting with zoom. And finally, this is a little bit of a niche thing, but bear with me on this one. So this is Mondraker, who are I guess I would class them as a high-end mountain bike manufacturer. They've had a mine system, and they've now made it available for third parties, so you can attach this to your forks if you don't have a Mondraker, for instance, and they are fiercely expensive. However, what it does is it's telemetry for your suspension. So this is not new if you're into motorsport, for instance, but it is, you know, it's high-end stuff. So why did I think this was interesting? Well, one of the things you can do, yes, you can tune your suspension. You go on a ride, and you know, if you know you're going to a certain hill, then you know, based on your previous one, you might be changing your suspension out. However, what it also does, I was really intrigued by to see that when you do a jump, for instance, your suspension bottoms out, and therefore it can detect that. It knows it was a jump. And therefore I got to thinking, well, okay, that's interesting. Well, if the front wheel comes up and the rear wheel's still on the floor, that's a wheelie, right? And if you do the opposite, then that's an endo. So what they've inadvertently created, I think, is a stunt detector system for mountain bikes. I'd love people to start sharing how big their wheelie was, how long their jump was, you know, how many jumps they managed to do on their rear wheel, for instance. So yeah, all of a sudden we've now got essentially the Strava or the Zwift or the Peloton, essentially, of stunts in the real world, which I think is amazing. I don't know whether they thought that's what they were doing, but that's how I read it. Brilliant. So thank you very much. A little bit of a weird one to end, but that was Dinosaw. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you next week.